Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Flinchball, host of People Solve Problems, and today we have a special guest, Dr. Durward Sobek. Durward, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Um, so we go back quite a ways, but just by way of introduction, Vice Provost of Montana State University-Bozeman. Fun job with lots of interesting challenges. You're the author of Understanding A3, co-author of Understanding A3 Thinking, and people always ask, before I wrote People Solve Problems, what book about problem solving I'd recommend. And Understanding A3 Thinking is always the first one out of my mouth. So I've always appreciated that book. It's right out of camera view, but it's right here on my shelf. And a long recognized expert in lean product development. It's really helped advance the thinking and I think also bring together many different pieces of the lean product development thought environment community. So, and that's part of where we first met is in the lean product development space. So, so let's get into problem solving. Lean product development or just product development and research, also in university, are not the only places this happens, but you're not doing sort of precise root cause problem solving. You're working on very open-ended and ill-defined problems that have unpredicted outcomes. Um, and so it's a different type of problem solving than many people think of when they're pulling a book off their shelf on problem solving. So maybe you can help explain how that type of problem solving is different, how it's special, what makes it hard, what makes it better. What's that problem solving like?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. It's definitely an area that folks have had a lot of interest in over the years, but not necessarily, the lean community as much. As you said, the lean community kind of tends to focus on problems that they can get their hands around, do a nice job defining that problem, and then drilling down to root cause using a systematic approach, usually hopefully data-driven,
Right.
really establish that cause and effect. And it's not that the ill-structured problems don't have that as a basis to it, but that's oftentimes not the starting point. So usually an ill-structured or open-ended problem, there's a couple of things. First is you're usually trying to meet some sort of need. And so it's more often opportunity that you recognize more so than I have this very specific problem that I'm trying to solve, a machine that's got a yield problem or something like that. It's a little bit more, it would be great if we could come up with a better way to keep coffee warm while I'm riding my bike to work.
Mm-hmm.
And without, so you start thinking about that sort of problem. And the interesting thing about it is you don't know where it's going to go. Usually you don't understand where the solutions are. And for that reason, it's really difficult to sort of do any sort of root cause problem solving necessarily. So very much a discovery process involved with that. So because of that, what you're gonna, well, at least what I found in coaching teams and how to do this, doing it myself, and then also reading the literature on this stuff, is that you'll spend a lot of time gathering information about users.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may have heard of UX, user experience,
Right.
from different, mostly software realm, but really understanding how users use your product or use your solution, or how they're using existing solutions and what their problems are. So what you're really trying to do is get those insights that nobody else has seen.
Yeah.
And so to do that requires observation, oftentimes there. And so that what I found is really understanding your stakeholders and this network of needs there. And usually what happens is that through looking at it through a bunch of different lenses, typically there'll be a small set of those needs that become salient and the things that you want to key on in trying to address this problem. So that's kind of the first step, is really understanding what the needs of whoever is going to be affected by this solution that you're eventually going to come up with.
Yep.
And that needs to be the starting point. So you're not really starting with a problem, you're starting with the people. And so I think that really, when you talked about people solving problems, you could add another subtitle for people, right?
For people, right.
Because ultimately it's, you're trying to provide a solution that users can then deploy, implement, use, and make some aspect of their life better.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect that's different. The second is that because it's open-ended and ill-structured, one of the things that you're going to do is look for solutions in a lot of different places. And so you want to come up with a lot of ideas because you want to have a creative solution. It's the creative solution that no one else thought of, that's going to lead to that breakthrough idea. And that process is rarely linear. In fact, that's one of the things that some of the folks at Stanford in their D school and some of the early folks there, they realize, you got to come up with the crazy ideas that will never work, not because those ideas are going to work, but because that nonlinear process sparks additional ideas or provide additional insights that will lead to ideas that will work.
Right.
So sometimes folks that are sort of engineer trained or in other disciplines similar to that, they tend to want to take kind of a linear process to solving this, when in fact it isn't.
Right.
So you come up with a lot of ideas. That's the other aspect of solving these ill-structured problems. First is really, trying to understand your users. Second, lots of ideas. And then it's a matter of how do you match those up, right? How do you figure out which ideas are going to meet which user needs and which one's better? And so that's really the second sort of, maybe I say probably the third phase of this problem solving, is that you say, okay, well, how do we do that? And there's various techniques for doing that, but typically what you want to do is instantiate that solution in some way so that the user can interact with it. And then it gives you some sort of feedback on that, which will then elicit even more insights into their needs. It provides insights into the quality of idea, and you can sort of walk your way through these different modes as the process, as you're sort of mindful of the process, you're mindful of these modes. And so maybe you need to understand user needs a little bit more. Maybe you need to generate more ideas. Maybe it's evaluation. I need to prototype and test, whatever it is. And those solutions start to develop and form. And hopefully you've got this nice cross-section of user need and solution that have this perfect marriage, and off you go with this wonderful idea.
Excellent. Yeah. Sometimes that happens. I think the hardest part of that is not knowing when it's going to happen.
Yes.
Because it's unpredictable and nonlinear. So, in my book, I write about creativity. I write about intuition. These aren't steps in a process, as you kind of said. It's these things happen in different places, in unexpected places. So what would be your advice? I know there's some problem-solving schools of thought that help with this exploration of solutions. I know trees was popular for exploring how nature solves problems, and of course design thinking is around experimentation and things like that. But especially for folks that are used to a very linear problem-solving method, what's your advice for helping them break out of that and to think more broadly about finding solution space and solutions in unexpected places?
Oh, that's a great question, Jamie. What we do with students is try to expose them to some methods for idea generation. So there are actually formal methods out there that you can use to generate new ideas. And you can actually just Google that. Ideation techniques. If you Google ideation techniques, you'll get countless websites that will list different tools that you can use. Some will be, more appealing to you than others, but they're all sort of aimed at using a method to break you out of your normal brainstorming. What is sort of, I don't know why it's human nature for, well, I shouldn't say it's not necessarily human nature. It's natural for a large segment of people to get stuck on one idea. We call that design fixation. And there's a lot of us out there that it's just hard to get off of the one idea that I think is going to work great.
Mhm.
And so what these techniques do is they try to help you break out of those. There are also usually group techniques, because it usually works better in a group setting. You get the social interaction, and it's the interaction between people that oftentimes produces that really interesting insight or really intriguing idea. So that makes it a lot of fun then.
Yeah. No, that design fixation is, it doesn't matter if you're designing a new factory, a product, a business model, a strategy, an org design, whatever the first thing you draw is, and you're like, that looks good, you start just iterating off of it. I guess is that easier to avoid, or is it easier to kind of just accept it's going to happen and then break out of it once it does?
I would try to avoid it. So if it would be me, I'd recognize that's a pothole out there that I want to try to miss, rather than hit the pothole and then pick up the nuts and bolts later.
Yeah.
So recognizing that design fixation is a real thing that can happen. In groups, we call it groupthink. And I'm sure we've all experienced that, where everyone gets tracking on a certain wavelength, and then the danger of that, of course, is then you get blinded to other things that might be happening, or that might be potentialities, whether it's a risk or a failure mode that you didn't anticipate, or just an opportunity that you forewent. So that groupthink is also something is just another way of saying fixation. And so anticipating that that's a real danger for the group, then setting out from the outset to say, we need to make sure that we have a nice set of ideas. So let's make sure that we set up our process to do that. And so we'll, introduce that technique before you get locked into on that idea. And honestly, it's hard. We've been working with this group to change the way we do some registration. There's a particular individual who had a very strong idea about how we ought to do that. And it was really difficult to break out of that. I'm not sure that we 100% did. So it is a challenge to do that, but I think the benefits would be there. The other thing that I think is helpful too is to have after you've got a set of ideas, a lot of people recognize, I've got this set of ideas. Now let's pick one and see if we can't make that work. And I would encourage folks, when they're dealing with these ill-structured problems, it's a learning process. So you're learning as much about the problem as you are about the solution. And so they kind of co-evolve together. And so you're learning about the solution space, if you will. And if you select a solution very early, you're doing it at a place where you have the least amount of information about that design space. So what I would encourage you to do is, rather than trying to pick your best idea, is eliminate the worst. So go through an elimination process, and sort of the last idea standing is by definition going to be your best idea. There's a lot less risk associated with that than trying to pick the best one. The odds of you picking the best one early is pretty slim, actually.
Yeah.
But the odds of eliminating the best one early is almost nil.
Okay.
So if you can say, okay, let's do a quick evaluation with the information we have, and let's eliminate those ideas that we can safely eliminate now based on the knowledge we have, rather than guessing at what the best solution is. Then taking that, what's left, and say, okay, what can we learn about these for the next phase? And so you had mentioned earlier about how it's kind of like doing this on a timeline is really hard.
Yeah.
But if you're in an organization, you have to do it on a timeline. You're going to be, there's going to be a deadline. I have to deliver by this date, or I have to, so this is how you can kind of do that is you can say, okay, we'll need to have our next narrowing decision. Let's try and do that, let's say in 3 weeks. All right, what can we learn about each of these alternatives in the next 3 weeks that will inform that decision? And sort of time box that so you don't go too far down a rabbit hole on any one of these, but you get enough information that now, okay, I can now safely eliminate these ideas and the number of alternatives that you're thinking about gradually narrows. Now, sometimes when you do that, the best solution becomes obvious, and it's like, yeah, this is what we need to do.
Right.
But if you get yourself locked in the box too early, and then you're trying to iterate to a solution, you may have picked a solution where you can't actually get to where you want to be from that solution because there's some fundamental limitation with that idea. And so it's much better than to take this more gradual narrowing process, learn about the solution space. That will also help you deepen your understanding of what issues are there, and they complement each other, and then you can make a better decision going forward. Everyone feels confident about it. A lot of times in that, pick a best, it's oftentimes not based on data or information. It's often based off of personalities in the room.
Right.
It's the person who sounds the most confident.
Yep.
And, we're really interested in diversity of perspectives and opinions. And, the person who sounds the most confident is probably not the diversity member of the group. Just saying, So usually, to make sure that all those voices get in there, this elimination process, I think, works better at trying to get all those voices out so that people aren't shut down by the most dominant personality in the room. Yeah,
I think that's important. I've also found tools that allow for asynchronous, idea generation, help with that as well. And
that's a great idea. Yeah, those asynchronous. Yeah, I've had a lot of success with that. And big fan.
Yeah,
thank you for bringing that up.
So I'll ask you one last question that it might be hard to answer. So I ask it in two ways. But the goal of that, going from ideas to selection, the whole thesis of what you just said is we should spend more time there, right? How should I think about more time? Is it a percentage of the overall project? Is it measured in time? Or is there any advice how to just spend more time, slowing that down? Because we're all in a race to get to an answer, right? And there's this urgency to get there. So how should we think about how to slow, or how much we slow down that part of the process?
That's a great question, because we think that when we have tight time constraints, the thing that we need to do is to decide quickly. And that's actually a paradox. Yeah. Because what happens is then you eat up all of the rest of your time trying to make that solution work through iteration. And that can be very expensive indeed if you're working with in an organizational context, for example, where you have a number of different teams working on the same solution or working on different solutions that all need to piece together. Because when one team's iterating and making changes to their idea, it impacts the work of other people. Yes. And there's techniques you can do to sort of buffer that, but nonetheless, that's a dynamic that's really challenging. So we can give you a few rules of thumb, which may or may not be helpful. But one of the rules of thumb that we have found works well is, do we have enough information to make this decision confidently? So that's one of the things you can look at. And if the answer is no, then you should seriously consider getting more data, more information in order to improve your confidence that you're making a good decision there. Now, maybe you know, at some point, you can't always eliminate the uncertainty, but I think the default with most American teams is that they want to make that decision faster than they should on these things, and that really they would probably do well to slow it down. And so making that default of saying, okay, let's take it one step.
Yeah.
So that would be the other sort of rule of thumb is, well, normally we would have made it by this point and then iterate. Okay, well, let's extend this by, pick your time frame, of course. Can we do it in a month? Can we do it? What would happen then? And if everything sort of lines up there, then you can say, let's go ahead and delay that, get that additional information, because we're going to make a better decision and save that on the back end of the thing. So it's a little bit, it's sometimes tough for managers especially, but also teams to sort of realize that taking it slow at the beginning to really understand what we're doing and get a good set of solutions that we understand is going to help us make a more informed, better decision. And that will actually save us on the back end, because the quality of that solution is going to be better, which saves us in the long run. Yeah. So it's sort of like that, invest early to save on the back end. And that's a little bit difficult of an argument to make to some people. It's just because it's hard to quantify. You got to take a little bit on a leap of faith. And of course, there's always the probability, right? There's always a chance that if I guessed right,
right.
then I'll do better.
Yeah.
But I can't eliminate that completely, but I would say in general, those two rules of thumb seem to help a lot. Do we have the knowledge we need right now, and can we get that over the next, pick your time frame, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it would be, but time box that so that it's not completely open-ended in terms of time.
Yep.
And then the second is maybe just incrementally step into those waters. So rather than going completely over to say, we're going to go to this really long, elongated convergence process, how about we just extend it by 10% or 20% from what we've typically done?
Yeah.
So that sometimes helps. And then if you get some benefit from that, then the next time you could extend it a little bit more and then sort of reach that point of diminishing returns. And then you can say, okay, I think we found our sweet spot here. So, and of course, there's always that little bit of intuition.
And a little bit of intuition goes a long way.
Yeah. So you got to trust your intuition and gut feel a little bit, but that's it's a really good question. And it's a little bit what we're doing some research on to sort of figure out, okay, how can we take this sort of ill-structured, open-ended problem and put some management tools on this so that we can manage that convergence process a little bit more, figure out, okay, where do you want to gather that info? How can you set up some metrics to do that? So I don't think anybody has the answer right now. So we're trying to do a little bit of research on that. So maybe, in a year or two, we can come back and tell you what we learned. So
that'd be great. Well, I think you articulated the cost of deciding too quickly very clearly. And I love ending on a couple of heuristics. I think that's a great way to help guide people as they move forward. So really, really interesting stuff. Thanks for coming on and sharing your perspective. There's Absolutely. A lot of people dealing with these problems. They just don't even realize they're doing problem solving. And I think this will help people open up their aperture about how to think about this work deliberately.
Excellent. It's been fun. It's a great conversation.
Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the People Solve Problems podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. Visit jflinch.com for more episodes and other content. And continue to join us on your podcast app, of course. We greatly appreciate your feedback through reviews and ratings. Consider expanding your understanding of problem solving with Jamie's book, People Solve Problems: The Power of Every Person, Every Day, Every Problem. Available on Amazon. Until next time, Keep learning, innovating, and solving problems.